And welcome everyone to our second Kwanzaa program for the 2022 season. Today we are diving into Kujichagulia, talking about self-determination. Now, for those of you that are familiar with that word, you might be thinking we're going to talk about Black liberation, the long civil rights movement, and how we are continuing to manifest our activism in our community spaces. But we're going to add a little bit of magic to that discussion today by talking with land stewards, historians, and community activists who are manifesting change at the grassroots level, and talking about how our Black land falls into our activism and how we utilize our land as a form of liberation and self-determination. So before we dive into the green things of today's discussion, I wanted to give an opportunity to all of our speakers to share a little bit about who they are and what they are manifesting in their communities and what Kujichagulia means to each of them. Sister Tracy, if you'd like to start us off.
Oh, absolutely. Again, I am deeply honored to be in this cipher today. My name is Tracy Llyod McCurthy. I am the executive director of the Black Belt Justice Center and also the co-alchemist of the Acres of Ancestry Initiative Black Agrarian Fund. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, but I moved up south in 2003 to Washington, D.C. And I've been here advocating for Black farmers since 2013. I actually returned to the work. In law school, I was a law clerk for the North Carolina Association of Black Lawyers Land Loss Prevention Project, which was founded by attorneys from North Carolina Central. That's where my mama went to school back in the 80s. And they were very instrumental in the Pickford lawsuit. So to work on the Pickford lawsuit as a law student and to still be working on rectifying the injustices of the Pickford lawsuit over 25 years later, it says quite a bit about the self-determination of Black farmers and what our ancestors knew with respect to the centrality of land ownership in our liberation. If I defined Kujichagulia, self-determination, in the discussion today, I was journaling and I wrote, the Southern rural Black imagination is regenerative when boundless and interdependent. The Southern rural Black imagination is boundless, is regenerative when boundless and interdependent. And we can dig into, I'm really delighted about this discussion, but how about 3 years ago, I joined our legacy farmers with respect to their persistent demand for debt cancellation, which has resulted in several pieces of federal legislation. Of course, we have received pushback from the Dixiecratic arm of the Democratic Party. And so we haven't been able to run our victory lap quite yet. But again, I'm just very much centered in the history of our ancestors that knew that our liberation was in the land. I want to share that when I was a law student, one of my friends was incarcerated, and he was in Norlina, and I would have to drive through Soul City to visit him. And of course, you had the Soul City Marquee there in Warren County, and I made a pact with some of my friends in law school that when we turned 40, we were going to come back and we we're going to live in Soul City. One day when I was going to go visit my friend, I was driving down Liberation Way, and I had no idea that they had hijacked Floyd McKissick's vision and turned Soul Tech 1 into a prison. again, it's just, I wanted to share that revelation with beloved community because we continue to persist. And so, for example, the connection, the loop back with Floyd McKissick, when you study Black agrarian liberation history, particularly the light bearers of the Pickford lawsuit, one farmer, he's an ancestor now, his name is L.C. Cooper. He was from Warren County, and he was dear friends with Floyd McKissick. And when the lawsuit went terribly wrong for Black farmers and the consent decree revealed itself to ensure that Black farmers would lose their land and remain in this unconscionable debt, L.C. Cooper was the first farmer to file an appeal challenging the merits of the consent decree. And so whenever I feel like I need a touchstone to re-energize myself, I go back and read that appeal of elder, now ancestor, L.C. Cooper. Again, I'm just so delighted to be here in community.
I defer to you, Andre.
Good afternoon. My name is Andre Taylor. I'm the oral historian at the College of William and Mary. I am also a PhD student at the College of William and Mary, studying American Studies. And for me, American Studies couldn't start without having some sort of a rooting in Black history. And so my project that I'm working on, and it's been funded through the Oral History Association, is called Black Folk and Our Food. And this project started I'd say almost 30 years ago, excuse me. And that's when my grandfather died. And when he died, he took the family recipe for biscuits. And no longer will we have those biscuits ever again at the table. So over the last couple of years, I've been examining the power of food and what it means to us. And as an oral historian, I think often we think of sitting in a room with people and talking one-on-one, but Black Folk and Our Food focuses more on going into the kitchen of African Americans as they prepare unwritten family recipes and recording them. The goal of this project is primarily to preserve this part of our cultural heritage and have it where that as ancestors, as people transition into ancestors, their families can type in their name, and not only do they get the recipe, but they hear their family story. So while I'm talking to individuals, I'm breaking down the recipe that's been given. So if you're making cabbage, why cabbage? Where did the cabbage come from? Who started growing cabbage? Why is this a part of your diet? Where did you learn how to cultivate this plant? And then you start going backwards in family history, because now if you can start with cabbage today and it goes to your grandmother who learned how to cook it from her grandmother, who learned from her grandmother, you go back far enough, we're on a plantation. So now we're starting to bring it forward with this family history and seeing how directly, when we look at ingredients, the ingredients are not just ingredients. These ingredients actually have stories. So imagine yourself, and this, some people tell me this is a weird concept, but imagine sitting in a room with a bowl of Carolina Gold rice, and you have this talk with it. Where'd you come from? How did you get here? Why are you a part of my family? You start to ask these types of questions, and you realize that food has more of a power than just something to fuel our bodies. Each ingredient that we cook with tells a story. And I argue with people constantly that the concept that the internet and social media made us more global. And I said, absolutely not. Food has always made us global. We can go back to the Silk Road and then move it forward to the transatlantic slave trade, because it wasn't just a commodity of the enslaved person that was traded. It was also food, because with those commodities, you brought food with them. So now you're starting to see the expansion of culture. And the more you look at the integration of the enslaved Black here, be it from Angola, Sierra Leone, Togo, Benin, Ghana, you start to realize, wait a minute, this is the root of American cuisine. So the work that I'm doing is breaking down our arrival, our cultivation, and how we as specific commodities, and I say specific commodities because when it got to the rice culture in South Carolina, all of a sudden they needed a specific type of enslaved person to do this. So they went back and got us from Angola and Sierra Leone, brought us here because rice was king there before it was king here. So I'm hopeful that this work will manifest in me going to Sierra Leone to study as a Fulbright in a couple of years. So fingers crossed, hands together, prayers sent. So we'll see how that goes. But for me, the determination is I'm determined before I leave and become an ancestor myself to tell the story of families and food for everybody. Because the more we see ourselves disappearing, with that is going a part of our cultural heritage. I'm determined to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else like it did for me.
Yeah, I am Darrell Stover. I'll just want to reference what is an epigraph from a poem of mine. The epigraph is taken from W.E.B. Du Bois' collection of essays and writings, quite autobiographical. That collection is called Dark Water. But in it, he has this line, quote, "The space to stretch their arms and their souls," unquote. And I use that epigraph as the component of a poem entitled Ghetto Natured, which actually celebrates, my family's history and connectedness to that up south location there in Washington, D.C., Tracy, where I harbor from, even though now, of course, I'm here in North Carolina, the National Arboretum, which is the federal government's research facility for ornamental plants. But for me, it was a space that my mother and father took us to regularly as we grew up in Northeast DC. And the poem addresses this notion, as fallacious as it is, that Black folks aren't into nature. Black folks aren't into the outdoors. And, for me, being here in North Carolina, an avid bird watcher and naturalist, a faculty member of North Carolina State University in the Africana Studies Department, as well as the head of a grant program at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. For me, it is an ongoing struggle to combat this disconnection, the disconnection from the land itself, as has been shared by my co-presenters relative to our agricultural historical practices and heritage, but also how we engage the land with our own imaginations and speculations and practices. And so for me, being here today with this august body that Sydney has brought forth for us to celebrate the second day of Kwanzaa, which is my favorite word on the planet, Kujichagulia, self-determination. It is to impart what I feel is a major practice and principle of being self-determined in so many ways, but especially in this particular case of being self-determined around land ownership, land embrace, and the natural world around us as we bring it into our spheres of operation and sustainability. So I'm honored to be here on this panel.
And thank you all so much for holding space with us and sharing this beautiful, beautiful collection of stories and histories and legacies that we will be discussing today. We also have with us Zora Neale Hurston's, one of her curators and protectors of her memory and the memory of Eatonville, the first incorporated Black town in the United States, Inwa Theory, who will also be sharing space with us. Inwa, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely, and I am honored to be here today. I first want to acknowledge the seminal contribution of Sydney Rose McCall in curating this Kwanzaa series. If it were not for her energy and her interest, frankly, we would not, as an organization, be able to host this event. I do want to talk a little bit about how much self-determination is present for us in Eatonville, because we are currently in an existential threat. The Orange County Public School Board is trying to sell land that, and listen to this now, sell land that was originally donated to them by the people of Eatonville for, quote, the education of Negro children. This is, I mean, when we talk about, this is right now something that's happening. It will not happen because the people of Eatonville have a history of countering this kind of thing. And in addition, we've been able to engage with and have embrace this economic justice issue, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so we have, because of that additional armed force, so to speak, confidence that either in the court, in the federal court, or in the court of public opinion, this is going to be righted. And we say that because of what happened in California over the last year. You will remember the Black family whose land was taken from them by all kinds of legal contrivances. But when the story came out, it would not stand. And this situation in Eatonville is such a flagrant use of power by the establishment. And frankly, we have to say that the door was left open. The door was opened to them. And so when the door is open, you walk through. But that door was open through opaqueness. And once people really understood what was happening, there really has been a great, how would you say, manifestation of grassroots power. The important thing is that the land has not been sold, and that ultimately it is a decision on the part of the Eatonville Town Council. But we, as a 501c3, have really rallied the people of Eatonville, who, as a core, and this is a community of 2,500, but there is a core of people who represent that history and that tradition of combating outside forces who are trying to take over. And to put a point on this, we're talking about 100-acre plot of land. As goes that acreage, there goes the town of Eatonville. And so there really is that understanding. So today, as we talk about self-determination, this is, as the young people say, we're in it for real, for real. I mean, this is present. And I simply doff my scarf to Sister Tracy McCurthy, because the Black farmers, it's just, I think that the main thing for us is we're tired of hearing about what, as my mother's mother used to say, Negroes used to own this, they used to have that. Everything is what we used to have. Struggle is good, but we're looking for victory here. I just have to say to you, we're not prepared to say, well, we gave it a good fight and thus and so on. No, this is something about economic justice, and we intend to prevail. So I say that by way of, again, saying that self-determination, it couldn't be a more resonating concept for us today. Thank you again, Ms. McCall.
And thank you so much for sharing and holding this space with us. I think one of the things that is manifesting as everyone was introducing themselves is the power and the passion behind the work that each one of us is doing in our space and place. And I think that falls directly in line with what ancestor Zora Neale Hurston looked to manifest through her own work. And when we talk about Black land, we can't talk about it without talking about all aspects of that land, whether it's how we labored on that land, how we lived, or how we liberated ourselves through those spaces, through those waterways. I know Zora Neale Hurston was one of the most powerful voices during the Harlem Renaissance, but she was also one of the first Black scholars to collect Afro folklore and look at conjure lore of the Black folks in the Deep South. Her trips from the Everglade homesteads all the way up through the Eastern Seaboard are some of the most powerful images and stories that we have of our ancestors who were able to retain not only their diaspora knowledge, but also their indigenous knowledge they brought with them along that middle passageway. And I know, speaking to my generation, there are a multitude of Black and brown folks who do not like talking about our history. For one, it can be profoundly painful to talk about all of the injustices and continued legacies of injustices that we are facing as a community. But I remember there was a time I was working at a community space where we were talking to children about farming and the importance of continuing our traditions. They listened to the stories of people who were born into sharecropping families who spent their earliest years having to work the land. And this one little Black boy said, I never want to be a farmer. I never want to garden. I never want to have to cook because I don't want to have to be reminded that my ancestors were slaves. I'm not a slave. So we're still haunted by that history. So my question to you all is, how do we heal from that haunted legacy of Black exploitation, erasure, and injustice that is connected to the land and our waterways? And then how do we start to reclaim our positive, powerful narratives that we still have through our environmental, agriculture, and plant-oriented histories and those legacies?
Can I jump in? I honestly think that this is one of those parenting things. And I say that because I have twin daughters that are 6. And all of my research that was done in St. Helena Island, South Carolina, my girls were with me. They've been to the fields where Carolina gold rice has grown. They've been to the watermelon patches. They've been to the waterways that are there. You know, they have eaten frogmore stew, which I refuse to call, what's the stuff they call it down there? I call it frogmore stew because that's what it is. But it's an opportunity to share heritage and culture through stories. We have a garden in our backyard here at home, and my girls wanted to grow fruit. I said, what do you want to grow? I want to grow strawberries. All right, we'll grow strawberries. What do you want to grow? I want to grow blueberries. Fine, we'll grow blueberries. I like to eat fish. Let's go learn how to fish. You know, so my girls at the age of 6 are doing a lot more with outside stuff. You know, neither one of them have a game system. I just don't believe in having that. You know, the actual play that happens in the world is outside. You know, go and enjoy that as much as you can. And it gives me a moment to take time to say, when I was 6 years old, I helped Grandpa till his field, who will be their great grandfather. And we grew okra in the backyard where I lived. You know, what's okra? Back down in South Carolina, this is okra. You know, so I'm giving them this history through food. And most 6-year-olds, some people tell me that I'm wrong for doing this, but you know, this is my house, this is where it's going to go. We churn butter on Saturday mornings in this house. And my girls are a very big part of that. And it's not to domesticate them, it's to educate them. You know, I want them to be self-sufficient. You don't have to go to the grocery store every time you want something. It's in your backyard, it's in your kitchen already, it's in the pantry. And I don't think that we're utilizing this time that we have with with the younger generations. We're letting TV raise them. And when that happens, you're losing them. You know, you try talking to them, hey, let's go cook. What? Let's go cook. What? And you're not getting through to them. And this February, my girls and I, we're going to launch our own YouTube channel with us cooking together in hopes of urging other families to cook with their kids, because cooking is so powerful. Again, it's not just, oh, that tastes good. It's just like, wow, my story is good. So you have a finger licking good story, and it could all be told directly through the time you spend with your kids and introducing them to the field and to the water. If we're not going to reclaim it, somebody else is going to take it. And we've seen how that's happened. That's why we have these heirs property projects going all the time. Somebody else like, ooh, that land is good. We will take that. We can't let the cultural heritage part of it. And I think that that's where we fall short, by looking at it and turning our eyes and our backs to it and moving forward to the grocery store, as opposed to doing what we actually came here to do and build. So that's my take on it.
And I just wanted to add, in my own bloodline, my great-great-grandmother and grandfather, Lizzie and Gordon Webb, were born at the end of slavery. And like millions of other newly freed Africans, through grit and determination, they were able to acquire over 30 acres of farmland in eastern North Carolina that has remained in the family as heirs property, or what we call Black family land. Again, the African cosmovision, there was no concept of the commodification of land. And so I wanted to lift them up, because I think that in the work that we're doing with respect to debt cancellation for Black farmers and reparative land justice for Black farmers, we carry the prayers of our agrarian ancestors. I also wanted to lift up Elder Bernard Bates. He's now an ancestor. He transitioned on January 18th of this year. His grandfather helped to settle Nicodemus, Kansas, another North Star for Black agrarians. And he was able to build on his grandfather's land legacy. He received 250 acres of land through this Homestead Act of 1862, which was a rarity. Most Black folks did not receive land through the Homestead Act, but he did, and he was able to grow that land holding to 950 acres of land. In the 80s, he started to experience discrimination by USDA, and he wrote his senator, Bob Dole, and President Ronald Reagan. What's really significant about this, and we have his papers, I think Elder Bates knew that he would be transitioning. And so over the years, he started sending us his personal papers, and we have it in our community archives on our website. But what was significant, after he wrote President Ronald Reagan, Reagan dismantled the Office of Civil Rights. Now, this is a very arm charged with investigating discrimination complaints. So that office remained understaffed for over 13 years and wasn't reopened until the Clinton administration. 3 days before Bernard Bates' transition, he spoke to another beloved elder, Bernice Atchison. She's another, we call her the Pickford historian. She's from Jemison, Alabama. And his parting words to her were that, he was trying to hold on as long as he could to see justice, but he wouldn't be able to, and for us to continue to fight and to never stop fighting USDA. Now, he lost all 950 acres of land. His family now lives in an apartment in Hill City, Kansas. But I wanted to go back because I think it's really important. One of my favorite quotes from Zora Hurston, when she says, I've been in sorrow's kitchen and I've looked out all the pots. And then I stood on a peaky mountain wrapped in rainbows with a harp and sword in my hand. And so this time of year is very sacred to me. I think if we know history, we know that Harriet Tubman freed her 3 brothers on Christmas Eve, and that many Black folks were plotting around this time to get free because they had the protection of the darkness of winter. And so we recently learned that 2 of our Pickford legacy farmers received significant debt cancellation, right? And we've been in Sorrow's Kitchen for a long time. The Pickford farmers have been in Sorrow's Kitchen over 25 years. But one received over 1.7 million in debt cancellation. That was 2 brothers. One is the estate, one brother ascended. And then we recently learned that another Pickford farmer received over 1.2 million in debt cancellation. Now, the sorrow is that the vast majority of Black farmers remain in debt. And so through our advocacy efforts, we were able to secure 3.1 billion in debt cancellation for economically distressed farmers. Now, we had to be somewhat Brer Rabbit with this because the white farmers had filed a lawsuit when we had legislation specifically. Again, if you go back, we initially had legislation just for Black farmers with respect to a race-conscious remediation for decades of anti-Black racism. But we couldn't get enough political support for that. So then we had the American Rescue Plan Act, which created a provision for debt cancellation for all farmers of color. Again, the historical record, though, is the result of Black suffering. And so where we are now in our efforts is that although we have the 3.1 billion allocated for debt cancellation, and the debt of Black farmers, combined debt, is only 210 million, the Secretary of Agriculture refuses to cancel the debt.
Why?
Well, if you study the history of Secretary Vilsack, this is his 3rd term as secretary. And he very much advances what I call Dixiecratism, maintains that within the agriculture department. Mm-hmm. If you recall, he supervised the Pickford 2 lawsuit, which was another allocation of 1.25 billion. And none of that money went to resolve the injustices of the Pickford 1 lawsuit. Prior to coming on as Secretary of Ag, his first term under the Obama administration, there was a class action lawsuit of over 6,000 Black employees in Iowa, state employees, where they charged that the state was discriminating against them in the promotion and hiring practices. Secretary Vilsack was the governor of Iowa at the time. So this is the history. He is continuing the practice of using the Commodity Credit Corporation Fund, which is a $30 billion fund that has historically been used to undergird and support white farmers at the exclusion of Black farmers. And so that is the predicament where we are today. The other piece, again, when we talk about being wrapped in rainbows, is that we were able to secure 2.2 billion for direct payments to farmers that have experienced discrimination. Again, but what we're dealing with is, again, another layer of obstructionism from Secretary Vilsack, which we know that we have to resist all efforts that will try to restrict the recovery of Black farmers. So that's where we are right now in our advocacy efforts. But I was reflecting on it. I was feeling a bit melancholy, that so many Black farmers are in debt, that thousands of Black farmers have transitioned to ancestorhood without restorative land justice from USDA. And I had to reflect on the 19 trips of Harriet Tubman and how she was able to liberate 300 of our ancestors. And that did not diminish her tremendous contribution, that she wasn't able to liberate all of them. But
So
we
the
are.
question,
Mhm.
so I need to ask you, this. Is there within, and what I'm trying to ask is this: there are things take time, right? But is there a sense of within the intelligentsia of whatever specific movement we're talking about, that we are able to advance the ball? All right, I mean by this, okay? So there was, I understand, at a time, an actual determination that we would go for civil rights, political rights, as opposed to economic rights or power, okay? We know now that economic power is a determinant, right? My question really is, can we see, in terms of self-determination, the kind of advancement that happened with Brown versus Board of Education? For example, if you go back 30 years, in other words, there was a steady advancement and strategy to finally get the Brown decision. Is there that sense of we're going to, that we can overcome, since you see that you get the legislation, but you have administrative, you actually, there, in other words, you make a gain here, but the gain does not eventuate because you've got an administrative barrier. Is there a way of thinking about how you overcome the administrative barrier? Because it's clear when you say about that, and I had heard about this Secretary of State, Secretary of Agriculture, I had heard about his history and really how African Americans really were not pleased that he was going to be put in that position because of what you're recounting. So as we talk about self-determination, I really am wondering, say writ large, okay, are we as thinking people looking at, what is the performance in this country of, in other words, how do we actually overcome? And before I cede the floor, I want to say to Andre Taylor, you're absolutely doing the right thing. And it's very encouraging that you're going to go into YouTube, because if at least, maybe that can actually help quantitatively in terms of the discussion, so that people can see. So that really is my question writ large. All right, it's one thing to spend your life doing. So does that mean that somebody else is going to come back and spend her life doing the very same thing that you did? Or is there a way for us to advance the generational discussion? Because, really, we are facing such challenges with our young people. If you don't play ball, if you don't rap, hey, okay. And then I leave you with the thing that Chris Rock said, and that is that, who is the man that owns Microsoft? Gates. He said that Bill Gates would commit suicide if he had the money that Oprah Winfrey had. All right. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? There's such a difference. Yes. There's a difference in wealth. And so as we face what Chris Rock also says, that Big Mama is 36, Mama is 24, and the child is 12. I mean, these are, when we talk about self-determination, I mean, we have to really think, really, how can we overcome? What are the things that we can actually do so that we are not reduced to anecdotes about thus and so and this and that? That would be my question in terms of self-determination.
I want to weigh in after Tracy responds to to Dr. Anthony's question regarding game plan around economics and where this is, if that's even
Yeah,
possible.
I'll just make some remarks very quickly. One of the elder farmers, Eddie Slaughter from Buena Vista, Georgia, he's a double amputee, blind in one eye, and he's been fighting USDA since the disastrous implementation of the Pickford lawsuit, the consent decree. In 2005, his brother moved to Ghana. He said, "To hell with it. I'm not spending my life fighting USDA." And he farms in Ghana. Elder Slaughter is still fighting in his 70s, USDA. One of the things he's fond of saying is that Black folks are the only folks in this country that can have legislation and have the president sign it, and we still can't get justice. And this weekend, I was revisiting the Southern Homestead Act and Black land ownership. There was a professor that wrote a book, Claude Aubrey. And in the book, of course, he talks about what happened with the Southern Homestead Act, which opened up 46 million acres of land. But again, due to entrenched Dixiecratism, out of that, during that period of time, only 1,000 Black families were able to obtain land titles. Only 1,000, right? And then the Black families that have acquired land through their own grit and determination, this federal government has done everything it has the power to do to undermine and to ensure that Black folks return to a cycle of debt and sharecropping where we can't be sovereign. One of the things that we are advancing, we are advocating for the removal of Secretary Vilsack. But again, this is his third term as Secretary of Agriculture. He does not look to be going anywhere. He continues to distribute millions of dollars to corporate ag through the ruse of climate smart agriculture. So essentially, Tyson Foods recently got an award of 60 million, ADM 90 million. And then he has created disunity amongst the Black agrarian community by giving millions of dollars to the historical Black colleges and universities. And then, of course, some of our community-based organizations. And so then one of the elders often says, a full mouth won't talk. A full mouth won't talk. And so the reality is we have become somewhat isolated. You know, it's okay to talk about racism within the Republican Party, but when we talk about the history of anti-Black racism within the Democratic Party, well, then that's problematic. Then we need to be silenced. And so that is the predicament, the conundrum that we're in currently.
Yeah, I want to add, and this is tied to my family's history on my mother's side. My great-grandfather and two of his sons had farms in Southern Illinois. They were situated there. We brought in HBCUs as part of this discussion. But it was my great-grandfather who turned over his farmland to Tuskegee Institute. But why? His success as a farmer was because of the actions, insights, and understandings of agronomy of George Washington Carver. So George Washington Carver was the Extension Service. And Extension Service exists to this very day, but he was the Extension Service to spreading the insights to what it was to be a successful farmer, Black farmer, in the early part of the last century. And so my great-grandfather, maybe to the chagrin of family members, turned over that land to Tuskegee because he felt it would generate a greater level of success on the part of those who were vested in Black agriculture. But I say that to say that within the context of where we find ourselves, and it was a good 10 or 15 years ago, I was asked to write an article on land loss. We had a whole special issue in the Arts Weekly here, the Independent, and I was given that task to engage and found out that a close friend of mine's family, in fact, her older brother and father were the last two full-time Black farmers in Johnson County, which is one county over from Wake County, two counties over from Durham, the home of the KKK. But they were successful in my interviewing and finding out about their success was because they knew the practices of farming and they didn't share how much land they had. They had land scattered throughout the county, some of it in Wake County, but it was the practices of how to be successful that was made a major component of their success, but also not telling everybody, especially those who were organized against them, those who offered up the loans and the like, the Farmers Bureau and other white farmers, so that led to their success. What I see presently now to advance the discussion is I do see a lot of younger folks, Black, going back to engaging the land. At what level of land ownership? We can talk about how much acreage still resides within collectively our Black hands. But there are initiatives where there is, I guess I would have to say on the small farmer level, grand successes with initiatives in a host of areas across the country. With what you just shared with us, Tracy, about our non-illustrious Secretary of Agriculture, is a part of that old boy network. And its structures are clearly based in a long-term maintenance of agro-oppression. And how we challenge that, yes, you got to get rid of that scab, might not be able to, but more importantly is you got to keep fighting. And that's where self-determination comes in. And that's what I'm most proud of in hearing you speak.
I think you all brought up something that's so important to the discussion, because so many Black people I know in my age group who aren't insulated or immersed in our farming traditions or practices, or even that ancestral knowledge in our classrooms, because as we know, it's not only our land that is being exploited and erased, but also our knowledge, our education. So many young Black and Brown people are unaware of the history of our resistance towards our own exploitation and erasure in this country. And I think one of the reasons that, like that young Black boy I was speaking to earlier, this misconception around our relationship with the land, a lot of that comes from this ignorance of our younger generations in how we engaged with the land. So I know growing up, I didn't know that bird watching was a thing that Black and Brown folks did. I didn't know that going walking in the forest, foraging, even just having our own farmers markets in our community spaces. I had no idea that that was something that was deeply rooted in our Black spaces, because for one, we couldn't go to these white-owned grocery stores or to these white farmers markets, but also that we engaged with nature since we got to this weirdly shaped continent we call North America. So the fact of the matter that people are engaging with the land, even though they don't always fall into the farmers category. I think even what we saw in the midst of the pandemic, how many people in cities and small towns and huge communities were starting to re-engage with the land, whether that was through plant parenting or creating, as they call them on social media, urban jungles, and just having all of this greenery in their homes, or even having backyard gardens, or starting to engage with these organizations that are challenging food apartheid, that are challenging these ecosystems of white supremacy and Black erasure. I think that there's all of these, as Grandmaster Stover said, these little victories that are manifesting. But I think too that many people feel sometimes, and it's someone who is also in the space of working on the ground level, we all feel overwhelmed at times with how much work is still to be done. And I think part of the reason that Eatonville is a North Star that's south of the Dixie line, but still a North Star in and of itself. As we know, so many Black and Brown people who were enslaved, if they couldn't make their way north, actually went further south into the Florida landscape. And so Eatonville, to me, still is a North Star that's just a little further south. But how is it that we continue to not only tackle the macro systems, challenge the government, challenge these institutions, but also try to find ways in our local communities as well? I think that's one of the areas, and I know a few people have sent private messages asking about how is it that we cultivate everyday resistance to these ecosystems that are manifesting in our own communities? And how is it that we start those grassroots initiatives? And of course, there are organizations to join, supporting the funding, supporting those little everyday things. But I think that's something that a lot of people are really interested in as well. So from each of you, what are some everyday practices that we can start implementing for our communities?
Well, I was going to say that the whole notion of those little successes comes out of, I'm an Afrofuturist. So there are a lot of individuals and collectives who've taken an example from Octavia Butler and Parable of the Sower. And more importantly, even with this whole notion of Earthseed, I know in Durham, there is a whole collective, Earthseed, which engages in maintaining land that they collectively garden on. I was just looking earlier today at a post tied to the fact that there are 2,000 individuals fed in Detroit by urban gardens that have been set up within the vast dysfunctional land where home ownership has disappeared. But something has to be done with that land, where there are individuals who decided, well, we're going to make that land productive. And so I think those are one of the examples. One last example from me is the fact that, I did a project called Run on Water, which looked at the Black experience in coastal North Carolina during the Civil War. But it was to tell that interrelationship to the land, and how did the land and our association with it contribute to our freedom, contribute to the maintenance and manifestation of maroon societies, even in the Dismal Swamp in coastal North Carolina and Virginia. And it's those relationships with the land and how to survive off of the land that were essential to our successful survival and transitioning into freedom. And so I think that example as a successful story is something that certainly can be conveyed to young folks, so they are not locked into what has been the, cyclical story of just an enslaved experience. And so that connection to the land and those successes of moving from slavery to freedom, as John Hope Franklin would say, are essential. And how do we bring out those stories as they're represented in Zora's work? But I think there are many examples and opportunities for us to advance a real positive, invigorating, and self-determinating projection for especially our young people.
So I'd like to pick up with that again about acting locally and thinking globally. I want to repeat something that I said yesterday, and that is for each person in this session, to look at within your community, what might you do to advance efforts, especially I would say with young people. Can you volunteer with a group that's already established? I want to hasten, please don't start a new group. Let's support what is established. As long as it is a recognized 501c3, as long as it has its records in order, so that they are transparent, help something that is already existing, because to start something new is such a challenge. It's such a challenge. But if you can support something that exists already in your community, fine. I'm certainly going to be looking to support Tracy Llyod McCurthy. I want to know how to be able to send a contribution, because I believe that if you can, you need to do that. I just am very concerned that we support our institutions as individuals, because grants and awards do not sustain. So when you're talking about self-determination, we can really, reduce it to intention, volunteerism, your time, your talent, your treasure. Those 3 T's really can help the community's self-determination. So it starts with the individual. It starts with the individual. And, whatever you can do, whatever you can sustain, not something that is emotional and then you have to give it up after 2 or 3 weeks because you really can't sustain it. But, just be, I'm going to be very European, be very Prussian. Bismarck was known to be, a very, very almost what you say, anti-humanitarian. So in your humanitarianism, be very strict, be stern with yourself. What can you do? What are you willing to do in terms of your time, of your talent, and of your treasure?
One of the things that I would like to put on the community altar is the self-determination of our nonprofits. If you understand the history of philanthropy, the nonprofit can be a colonial construct. And I think with respect to Black-led nonprofits, what we need to figure out is how we can ensure our autonomy. There's a Cuban agroecologist who said, you make the path while walking. And that's what we did in our efforts to obtain debt cancellation for Black farmers. We reimagined the nonprofit apparatus. And so it has really become, Black Belt Justice Center is the legal arm, but we have an ecosystem that is supported by Black fiber artists. So what happened, I initially reached out to the Philip Simmons Foundation. Philip Simmons is an ancestor now, but he was a beloved blacksmith in Charleston. So if you travel throughout Charleston, South Carolina, you can see his ironwork. And I reached out to the foundation in 2019 because I wanted that protective covering of the blacksmith. I wanted to acquire the ironwork of Philip Simmons. And our collection along the way, everything went back, everything that we raised has gone back into a mutual aid effort to support Black fiber artists and Black farmers. And so what we realized that in our telling our own story, we wanted to incorporate the arts, and we didn't want to auction off our material culture. And so we walked into us preserving not just the land, but our material culture. And so now our permanent collection is over 100 artifacts, ironwork, basketry, and fiber arts, indigo as well. And that was something that we walked into. And so this is another asset that we'll be able to share with the generations coming that want to do this work, because oftentimes as a nonprofit, we don't have assets. We don't have that, and we're always begging, right? And that was the whole thing with respect to the Pickford lawsuit debacle. When you talk to Black farmers, it was always about the land. It was always about the land. And so similarly, our material culture is our amulet. That's what our ancestors left us. And so I would just want to put that on the altar as well, of who preserves our material culture, who preserves our material culture, and what we've been able to do to pay the culture keepers very well to create pieces for our permanent collection. So it's really a circular economy. And then we use that in the liberatory storytelling of reparative land justice for Black farmers. The other piece that I want to put on the altar is the importance of going back in history. If you study, again, Black agrarian history, Jamie Whitten, USDA, the building is named after a Dixiecrat. When he was in Congress, he ensured that millions of dollars went to white farmers through the Commodity Credit Corp at the exclusion of Black farmers. And there was a recent article that came out in the New Republic by researchers at Harvard and others that discussed his reign in Congress. And I was doing some research from that article, and I learned that Fannie Lou Hamer ran against Jamie Whitten in the Mississippi Democratic primary in 1964. So I've always had, a deep appreciation, of course, for Lightbearer Hamer, but to see that she was also looking at the Commodity Credit Corporation Fund as a way to repair the impact of white domination on Black agrarianism. And so that has been one of our policy downloads, is the demand. We are demanding a perpetual allocation in the $30 billion Commodity Credit Corp to restore the Black agricultural land base. And that came to me, again, it was an ancestral download from doing the research around Fannie Lou Hamer and her interactions with the Dixiecrat, Jamie Whitten.
I mentioned before we started Kamal Bell and the work that he's doing with Sankofa Farms down in Durham. To take your talents and put it before a bunch of young men who are labeled with at risk. And I'm still trying to figure out what at risk means, because I'm at risk every time I walk out my front door, every time I get in my car, every time I go to work. I'm at risk. So I guess we're all at risk. But Kamal has taken a time to take these young men and teach them from whence they came. And I appreciate that, because they're farming. Like, these young men are teenagers and are farming. And it's not just like they're farming carrots and stuff. They're raising guinea fowl, which was our chicken before we came here. They're raising other types of leafy greens, like kales and greens and so forth. And they're selling them to Black people. So they're learning how to cultivate, and they're learning commerce. And these guys are, in some cases, middle school and high school students. And it's amazing that he's taken his talents and interest in farming, something that he picked up while he was a student at A&T. And it's just like, wow, like you took this from, as we say in Philly, you took this from the root up, and you transplanted this, and you're giving these kids an opportunity to grow both in their culture and grow as individuals, because now this is like, you know, we talk about, you know, this generation of children, everything is by a press of a button, everything. Or you don't have to press the button anymore. Alexa, pay my bills. I mean, it's very simple these days. But these kids are learning to be outside. They're taking this back to their community. They're showing people this isn't boring stuff. This is fun stuff. So these are our future advocates. You know, these are the young men that are going to be ambassadors for returning to the soil. So I'm very proud of the work that Kamal is doing with these young men, and I'm proud of the exposure that he's given them, and he's given the farm on a national level. I was intrigued the first time I was in journalism, and I got to do a story about him, and it was based on the fact that here's this young Black kid who left education, formal education. He was a school teacher in Durham, to go and open up a farm as a kind of a different type of classroom. And I appreciate that. And I think that that's, you know, his dedication to his culture and the craft of farming is just stupendous. And we stand to gain a lot from him and the work he's doing, and especially from the young men, because they're going, like I said, there's our advocates right there, boots on the ground, put them up front. You can prove that these young Black men are doing something more than what they say we're doing in the community.
And I think as I continue even my own work in environmental history spaces, this word self-determination, when we think about white-oriented spaces, which we are all infected and affected by, we hear self-determination and we think the words independence, or we think unique, individual, the self. And in Black and brown spaces, when we hear that word self-determination, everything that we do for ourselves also is connected to community. So self-determination for us is not about me doing bad all by myself, or me having my own little garden with my own vegetables that I'm not sharing with anybody else. When we do things, we do it for each other as well. And so I would encourage us, as we are talking about self-determination, and part of the beauty of having each one of you who is in a different space, whether that's a history space, an Afrofuturist space, Black liberation and reconciliation and redistribution, or preserving our history in actual physical material places. I think each of us is also informing and sharing with each other as well. I think that we, in our own way, have just cultivated a new waterway of communication with each other. And I think that's something that is always rooted in Kujichagulia. Even people that don't even know that word are out here doing work that is informed by that principle of Kwanzaa. I think what Grandmaster Stover said, it's my favorite word. I think it might be my favorite word now too, because so much of what we're doing is not just about ourselves. It is about our community, because we belong to that past just as much as we belong to that future. Adding a little Afrofuturist magic in there. But before we come to today's close, did anybody have any more they would like to share, or any reflections or musings they would like to manifest before we come to an end?
I would just like to share a reflection from Elder Bernice Atchison, who I lifted up earlier in our panel discussion. She's 85 years old. Again, she suffered so much, but she says often, I tell my daughters that I gave them 2 feet to stand, that's your strength, and 2 wings to fly, that's your freedom. And I recently was down in Charleston visiting Miss Rossi Coulter, who is the executive director of the Philip Simmons Museum. And Philip Simmons, his nephew, is working on an exquisite piece of ironwork for the opening of the International African American Museum. And on one part of the ironwork are fish. And Miss Rossi, she said, that's how we came, through the water. And then on the other side is butterflies. And she talked about our freedom. And I thought, wow, what another beautiful metaphor and iron of this wisdom that Miss Atchison shared with me.
I just wanted to say it would be nice if there are ways, I think, you know, Tracy, how you've updated us on that long struggle relative to Pickford, relative to Black farmers, relative to Department of Agriculture. What is the best way for us to stay engaged as well as to support? I know I stated yesterday to Sydney and NJ about how I plan to become a recurring member of the center and initiatives there in Eatonville. But I'd like to know, and I'm sure others would like to know, what is the best route for us to stay abreast, but also in some way, shape, and form support what you and others have been doing.
Absolutely. I was actually talking to Elder Timothy Pickford. Again, North Carolina has such a rich history with respect to the Pickford lawsuit. Two of the lead Black farmers, Timothy Pickford and Cecil Brewington, are from North Carolina, and they're still fighting. Mr. Pickford recently just was released from the hospital, and we're talking about doing a Zoom call with a lot of the Pickford legacy farmers. And I would love to invite you into that space so that we can strategize. We're very much a maroon tribe. You know, the Black farmer has been betrayed so many times. Again, we don't take any money, Black Belt Justice Center, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so we can understand who we are advocating for. And so that's really important when we talk about the sovereignty of our nonprofits. And so I would love to, you know, invite community members that really want to strategize in a maroon space, a sovereign space, with us about next steps. That's how we move this work forward.
Great.
And so as we come to a close today, I think my soul has been filled through and even a little bit more on the top, because so much of what we are doing in each of our community spaces is communal self-determination, which is also very soul-filling for each of us, but it is also work that is essential for us to continue on doing. So I wanted to just give each of you a moment to let people know where they can find you, how they can continue to support your labor, and also how they can continue to manifest communal self-determination, starting with NY.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm going to need to excuse myself because there is an activity that I had promised to attend. But if you will visit our website, www.preserveeatonville.org, you will find information about what we're doing. You'll be able to find out and keep abreast of what we call the breaking news on the historic Robert Hungerford High School campus property. And you will have the ability, if you wish to, become a recurring member of the organization. We have in our hands, as Sister Tracy, we collectively, nonprofits, the strength of the nonprofit is the individual donor. Yes. You don't ever have to apply for a grant. You don't ever have to borrow any money as long as you have the individual donor. And that is the key. You know, we have, what is it now, trillions of dollars of money. But you know, in our community, it only stays in there about 2 or 3 times, and then it goes out. In sophisticated communities, they circulate their money 25, 30 times. We have to become individually more informed about what we are doing. We really must do that.
Yes.
Because that is our key. We can determine our future if we are informed. We have got to be careful not to spend $350 on weave for a girl who's 6 years old. All right, you know, and I will leave this. I will say what the minister told his congregation. If it's on your ASS, it is not an asset. I say that with affection and not judgmental. And because the preacher said it, I figure I can say it to you. If it's on your ASS, it is not an asset. Thank you so much again, Sydney McCall, for doing this, for curating this session. I am going to ask you to allow me to excuse myself so that I can make another appointment. But this has been inspiring, and it's so good to continue to meet people who are working as each of you is doing. Thank you so much.
And thank you, NY. As she departs with our remaining future ancestors, I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to let the people know where they can continue to find you and your work, and ways that they can continue to support you as we continue our individual journeys, and as well as our communal forms of self-determination.
Yes, our website is www.acresofAncestry.org. We're also on Instagram under that same handle, Acres of Ancestry. We're in the process of trying to raise money for our Pigford legacy farmers, a fund to support them. Again, it was their organizing efforts over the last 25 years that has created this bounty with respect to the Inflation Reduction Act, and everyone else is eating except for them. I think I love quoting Miss Elder Bernice Atchison, and she says, vultures don't eat before lions. Vultures don't eat before lions, but what has happened is that our Black farmers are not provided for. We're still fighting obstructionism, entrenched obstructionism within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so they're suffering. And so we are committed to raising, we want to start the fund at $1 million, and the funds will be distributed to our Pigford legacy farmers. And so again, more on that, and I'll be in touch with folks soon about our Pigford call, our call with all of the Pigford legacy farmers, where we'll invite beloved community members that are aligned with this work of centering reparative land justice for our legacy farmers.
I will say this as an artist and a scientist, you know, my engagements are rather broad and wide. I'm not going to say that I'm singularly situated at one institution around one initiative. I sort of cast my being, my stardust wide, and I do know if I were to stop, the planet would stop turning. And that's not to be too presumptuous about the level of engagement that I have done over the decades. But I will say this, if you want to contact me, dcSciPoet@gmail.com. That's DC Sci Poet. You know, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I'm a scientist, but I'm a scholar and an educator. But most importantly, I am a self-determined Afrofuturist, connected in more ways than one with a host of other Afrofuturist scholars and activists. And so I am honored again to be on this panel with you all, and look forward to seeing, hearing, and making more happen as we move from this present into our future.
For me, you can find me at drethehistorian.com. And my email address is Andre, ANDRE, @drethehistorian.com.
And again, I would just like to thank all of you for joining us today as we manifested Kujichagulia and as we continue to manifest it. Because as we know, Kwanzaa, yes, we have our 7 days of celebration and manifestations, but it is an all-year process of liberation, of reclamation, and of community justice. So as you all continue to manifest throughout this week and this holiday season, I just wish all of you a safe holiday, a holiday of manifestations, a holiday of some good food and some good ideas and even more good trouble. So continue to manifest, community, and we hope to see you later on this week for our continuation of our Kwanzaa discussions in community gardens as we look to Zora Neale Hurston and our other ancestors to continue to guide us through our work, through our labor, and through our liberation. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Blessings and power.
Absolutely.